It is a dark, rainy, spooky Halloween night. What a better time to discuss Castlevania Advance Collection. Despite having watched and listened to plenty of discourse about the Castlevania series over the last however many years, I had yet to physically actually touch and play one until earlier this year when I secured the Castlevania Advance Collection on my Nintendron Switch system, which contains 4 games, 3 of them the GBA titles, Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, and Aria of Sorrow, and also the SNES version of Rondo of Blood, or Castlevania X, or whatever you want to call it. Thus far, I've only finished Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance, this being partially because I generally kind of forget to play my Switch unless I'm on the road, though I did make an effort in recent weeks to go ahead and finish up Harmony of Dissonance so I could get this video done in time for Halloween. I have heard very, very little discussion about these games in particular, though. I mean, I've heard discussions about the general design philosophy of the Metroidvania brand of Castlevania, and these fall into that camp, or at least the 3 GBA games do. But I haven't heard much about these games specifically. I understand that Aria of Sorrow, the 3rd and final one of the GBA trilogy, is generally considered to be the fan favorite, but I don't really know why, and I haven't gotten there yet. And I know very little about the discourse on these first 2 games, which means that if you are intimately familiar with Castlevania, it might be that I am about to run through 20-year-old talking points about these games, but hey, since I haven't read anything about them, maybe I will somehow miraculously, in my completely unbiased state, stumble upon completely new and unique talking points that have not been touched since these games came out. Unlikely, but you know, who knows? We'll wait and see. Most of you are probably already aware of the differences in design philosophy between the original Castlevania games and the later post-Symphony of the Night Castlevania games, but just to give a brief little bit of background, the original 3 NES Castlevania games, and also Super Castlevania on the Super Nintendo, were, I wouldn't say they had a wholly united design philosophy. Castlevania 2 is a pretty different game from the other ones, and indeed actually has a lot in common with what the series would later do with the Symphony of the Night forward games, the IGA directed and produced and whatever else games. But generally speaking, the early Castlevanias were relatively focused action games, where you had to proceed through linear levels and fight monsters and reach a boss and defeat it to go on to the next part of the game. Symphony of the Night changed that up significantly by giving you a massive non-linear castle to explore through. Non-linear in a kind of vague sense. There were certain parts of the game that were gated that you couldn't get through until you beat a certain boss and acquired a certain item, etc. And part of the challenge became keeping a mental map of the entire place, and when you got a new ability, saying, ooh, I bet this new ability will let me get through that other dead end that I encountered earlier and I wasn't exactly sure of what to do. Now, the narratives of the 2 games we will be discussing today, Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance, are kind of non-existent. So, I mean, I would give a spoiler warning, but I really don't think you should care. I'm going to have very little to say about the story. This is mostly going to be a discussion about design. And with that in mind, there is at least one, I would say, a pretty fun mechanical surprise that I didn't know about in one of these games that I think is worth kind of preserving for people who might play the game. So there is one thing in one of these games that I'll give kind of a vague spoiler warning for. I will warn when I bring it up later on in the video, but for the most part, this is just going to be a discussion about design, presentation, other things, so whether or not you've played these games, you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. And these 2 games are pretty different from one another, despite both being Game Boy Advance, Metroidvania-style Castlevanias with a main character who uses a whip and kind of your stock expected classic Castlevania items. There are a lot of differences between how these 2 games are designed and especially between how they are presented. So for example, one thing that was really interesting right away about Circle of the Moon is that perhaps because they had just kind of done this, and was there one between Circle of the Moon and Symphony of the Night? I really don't know. I suppose I should have looked that up, but whatever. I don't really care that much, clearly. One thing that Circle of the Moon does very differently with its presentation right from the get-go, compared to Symphony of the Night or even the older Castlevania games, is that it does not begin with a dramatic build-up to kind of storming the castle, if you will. The game starts with you already deep in the castle, with your main character, his master, and the other student having already infiltrated the castle to come and kick Dracula's butt. But then a trap door opens up underneath you, and you fall down into the basement of the castle. And in some regard, you can kind of say that with, oh, cool, the game starts with a sewer level. That's awesome. Starts you in a dungeon. That's a really great tone setter. But it was definitely interesting after you've been down there for a little while and you'd fought your way through there. It was a very, I have to assume, different feeling since I haven't played the other games. But I mean, I've watched them, so I generally know what's going on, how they're kind of structurally run. It was a real interesting feeling to know, okay, I want to see, you know, the hallways of Dracula's castle that I expect, but being stuck down in this basement area. And eventually, after beating a boss down there, clearing some stuff down there, there's this very long sequence of climbing up and up and up and up and up a long, I guess not tower, because it's presumably underground. I guess it doesn't have to be underground with the way that Dracula's castle is structured, does it? But regardless, a long strut of the tower that you have to ascend up and up and up, and then when you emerge out of it, you wind up in a classic Castlevania-looking hallways of Dracula's castle, and a new music theme kicks in, and it feels like, ah yes, you finally worked your way out of the trap, and now you're back in the castle proper. And in that way, it did really feel like you had earned getting into the Dracula's castle part of Dracula's castle, even though you were in there from minute one. Harmony of Dissonance starts a little bit more traditionally with you being chased by a giant monster and then running through a drawbridge into the castle, and you're immediately in much more conventional Castlevania Dracula's castle hallways. It was interesting to go from one to the other almost immediately because I did get that more instant sense of gratification of like, ah yes, this is what Castlevania looks like with Harmony of Dissonance, but I really do think that the kind of ascent from darkness, if you will, up into the castle proper in Circle of the Moon was, if nothing else, a novel idea, and I thought it was executed fairly well. Honestly, presentation is probably the most immediately obvious area of difference between these two games. There are significant mechanical differences that I'll get to in a second here, but it was interesting to go from Circle of the Moon, which generally presents I don't want to say standard Dracula's castle aesthetic, because kind of the entire gimmick of Dracula's castle is that it looks however it wants, it changes form, etc., but it all generally looks like Gothic castle of some shape, form, or fashion, whereas Harmony of Dissonance very quickly starts doing surrealist imagery, starts doing stuff that does not really make any visual sense, feels much more magical, feels much more distant, feels much more unknowable. I'll return to the subject of the surrealist imagery of Harmony of Dissonance a little bit later in this video. Suffice to say, I thought it was neat, and especially coming directly from Circle of the Moon, which has everything is Gothic castle, got it. Going into Harmony of Dissonance and seeing much more wild out there stuff very quickly, if nothing else, made Harmony of Dissonance feel really lively going into it immediately after. It felt fresh, felt a little spicy, felt exciting. I did not expect to have as much energy going into that game as I did, having just completed another Castlevania game minutes before it, and by the ending of it, having not necessarily had a better time than I did a worse time. That was a weird way of putting that, I apologize. I mean that the bad of Circle of the Moon threatened to outweigh the good of Circle of the Moon. And what's funny is that both of these games, almost everything that Circle of the Moon does good, Harmony of Dissonance does bad, and vice versa. For one thing, the general castle exploration and platforming in Circle of the Moon was pretty fun. Some areas are more complicated than others. It seems like the tradition with all of these games is that there's at least some minor platforming when you get to the clock tower area, and in the rest of the game, you can sometimes give or take the platforming design. There's very little platforming in Harmony of Dissonance, but there was just enough platforming in Circle of the Moon that I had a decent time with that. And there's a lot of secrets to find in this game. I really do enjoy that feeling of there's something a little bit off about that blank, empty bit of wall over there. I should swing my whip at it, and then discovering there's a hidden room behind it. Even if the reward inside isn't necessarily all that great, it usually still feels okay. The main thing that was bad about finding the rewards in this game was, and this is a problem with a lot of these games in terms of their focus on stats over other things, is that you find you get so much armor and equipment and accessories and stuff across both of these games that are just absolutely abjectly useless. And from everything that I've heard, this is a problem in basically all of the Castlevania games with equipment systems, is that you will find a good piece of armor and you'll pick up another 20 that are inferior before you actually find something with better numbers. And it's like, what? That just seems like such an easy thing to fix in terms of planning how armor is placed and how fast you get it, and maybe just not littering the map with so much of it, but I don't know, I'm not a game designer. But the game, I mean, other than giving you armor, it's just kind of limited in what it can give you as rewards for exploration. Other than giving you, mandatory abilities that are required to go and explore other parts of the castle, it can give you health increases, MP increases, and maximum heart increases. It feels like there must be something else we could put in there that would be worth collecting and picking up. At least one thing that Circle of the Moon could have done with would have been more healing items. I didn't use any healing items pretty much at all in Circle of the Moon, because in the advanced collection version of the game, there is a built-in instant rewind function, like you find in a lot of emulators these days, that lets you just back up. And you better believe I exploited the hell out of that. I'll talk a bit more about why later on. But by the time that I got to the final boss of Circle of the Moon, I think I had picked up 4 healing items, maybe 5, or at least that was all that I had in my inventory. I might have used 1 previously earlier in the game. I had almost no healing items at my disposal, fighting a boss that could take a third of my health or more in one hit. And I had, I'm gonna say, over 90% completion of the map. It wasn't like I was missing a secret treasure trove of healing potions or whatever. Whereas then on the flip side of that spectrum, Harmony of Dissonance kind of showers you with healing items. Maybe a few too many for it to be meaningful. Plus it gives you shops, which almost never sell anything useful, so you might as well spend all your cash on healing items, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point I'm getting at here is that while the rewards for exploration were occasionally not really worth it, or just felt a little, there's not really a sense of wonder about what you were going to find behind that wall you just broke up, and you generally knew what to expect. At minimum, the exploration was fun. It did feel vaguely rewarding. It was nice to explore throughout that entire castle and to look at the map and get a sense of, there ought to be a hidden room here. There just ought to be a hidden room. And then going there and searching that area until you found something. There was a logic to the way that the secret rooms in the game were laid out. It was a lot of fun to scour for them, and it wasn't too frustrating either. What was a little bit annoying was the Metroidvania backtracking of, I got the new movement ability that lets me progress to new areas. Okay, where do I need to go and use it? And it seems like this is a problem in pretty much every Metroidvania to some extent. This is the sort of thing that people use as kind of a stock example of why they think the genre is bad. Other people enjoy the open-endedness and the backtracking and going through it and keeping the mental map of where everything is at, right? But for me, when you're playing the game for the first time and you don't necessarily know what kind of abilities you're gonna get, it's kind of hard to make that mental map of, I need to come back here with the wall jump, because I don't know if I'm gonna get a wall jump. I can maybe guess, but I don't know for sure what I'm gonna get. At minimum, there were a lot of areas to use your abilities in Circle of the Moon. Usually if I went back to an old area and it's like, okay, there's a dead end here that I couldn't explore previously, I know because I'm looking at the map, maybe my new ability will get me past here. Even if it was a dead end, usually there would be some bonus along the way that I could pick up or whatever. It was time-consuming and tedious, and you better believe I started using the game's save states, because you can make save states outside of save rooms. I started using them when I was like, okay, I'm kind of at the beginning of a spoke of the castle. If this is this 10-minute walk results in a dead end, I'm just going to reload the save and warp back here and save me having to traverse all the way back. But overall, it was, especially because you could generally look at the rooms and kind of get a sense of what ability you probably needed. So for example, if there was a stock like straight line corridor that you had not gotten all the way through yet, you could probably assume that there was because there was a block you needed to push and you didn't have the block pushing ability yet. If there was a room where you can ascend up and you haven't ascended up yet on the map, you probably needed the high jump or the wall jump or maybe a combination of both. So you could make educated guesses about where you needed to go just based on how much of the map you'd filled out, assuming you were being thorough with your exploration. But if I may speak as not an expert in the genre at all, I think probably what makes the traversing between the different spokes of an area in a Metroidvania game interesting, what makes it engaging, is at least somewhat down to the fact, somewhat down to the question of how engaging is the combat and how engaging is the movement. You know, Metroid gives you stuff like the Shine Spark and, you know, you're blasting stuff in all different directions and you have interesting platforming to do. So how engaging is it to actually move between these different locations? Neither of these games really make getting around the castle super duper fun. We'll talk more about Harmony of Dissonance in a minute here. Circle of the Moon at minimum does occasionally have some platforming that, you know, kind of engages your brain a little bit, gives you something to do as you're moving back and forth, but this is to rip off the points from that freaking 10-year-old sequelitis video that Aaron Hansen did before he abandoned making YouTube videos to be a full-time Let's Player. In the original Castlevania, enemies are laid out in ways that are meant to challenge you and engage your brain and think about how to deal with them. Later Castlevania games just kind of have enemies jump in your way. They are ready to get hit. They are ready for you to just wail on them. There were at least some interesting and challenging enemies who would mess with you in Circle of the Moon. Mostly flying enemies who would just stay kind of up above you and were hard to hit and took a heck of a lot of damage. Those would be, I think, generally speaking, the biggest thorns in my side moving around through the castle. But generally speaking, the best solution was just to avoid them. And that's the best solution for most enemies in both of these games, is just to jump over them or dash under them or do anything you can to not engage and just get through the corridors as fast as possible. This is a problem that both of these games have. You are moving through, you just get to the point where you stop fighting enemies, unless you know you can just bop them in one hit and it's faster than trying to jump over them. Because the amount of experience you get from them is minuscule. The amount of stat increase that you get from leveling up is so minuscule that grinding doesn't really feel satisfying or like it has much of a point. Aside from very specific instance that I'll maybe talk about later. Really, it's just down to the amount of space that you have to traverse. In some ways, the scale of Dracula's castle in Circle of the Moon justifies itself because of the interesting ways that it connects with itself and loops back around on itself. There are a lot of interesting shortcuts, interesting routes that you will open up as the game goes on that lets you get around from one area to another a lot faster. In that sense, it's rewarding to continue to expand your mental map of the castle and to see how this corridor connects over to an area you were in previously, secret passages that connect to different areas you've been to at different points in time, all that kind of stuff. It is rewarding to feel like you are fleshing the place out, like you are conquering Dracula's castle, this massive, mysterious labyrinth. You are really coming to know and understand and best it. That aspect of it is rewarding, but the amount of time that it takes to move through it is really high. And when you're going back through an area that you've already traversed through previously, just to go back and check one door that you might not even be able to open, the traversal time it's just annoying. I mean, it's a really good thing that I had the save states to be able to just, my 5-minute, 10-minute trip down this spoke of the castle was wasted, I can teleport back. I mean, I wouldn't have quit the game if I didn't have that option, but I would have been really annoyed. Though there is another advanced collection feature that if I didn't have, I definitely would have quit this game. The feature in question is the instant rewind capability, which, you know, is useful for, I made a minor mistake with this enemy, I took a hit going from the save room to a boss fight, I took a dumb hit, I'm gonna rewind, so I'm going into the boss fight with full health, I missed a jump, or I went to the wrong area, I'll rewind a couple of minutes, you know, whatever else. Like, that kind of stuff is useful, but it's just nice. It was pleasant to be able to have the option. However, the bosses of Circle of the Moon range from, like, fine to some of the worst boss fights I have ever played in my life. And again, I have no idea what the discourse on this game is, so maybe I'm about to be told to get good in the comments, or maybe I'm going to be flooded with people saying, oh yeah, no, the boss design in that game is absolute pants. But all I know is that it was bad. Now, a couple of the bosses were okay. There was the very first boss fight in the game against some kind of hellhound wolf Cerberus thing. That fight was fine. I feel like there were one or two others that I enjoyed, like that kind of stood out. I was like, that was a pretty good boss fight. And the second to last boss fight against the kind of the rival character was neat because it was fun to kind of fight. You were fighting another Castlevania protagonist, like they're throwing the iconic Castlevania items at you, that kind of stuff. Like that was neat. That was kind of fun to experience. I will say that those attacks are literally impossible to read. I've learned thanks to the instant rewind feature that if your rival character, you're fighting him and he throws out the the cross or whatever, right? And you get, oh crap, he got me with this cross. I'm gonna hit rewind. You can rewind to literally the frame where he's already winding up to use an item. So like he's already triggered the item attack, right? And you can resume from there, and he'll throw something different. So the game literally randomizes what item your rival character is gonna throw on the last frame of his item use animation. So he has the exact same animation for, what, like 6 different attacks? And you have no idea what's gonna come out until it comes out. Ultimately, the fight was not that bad. It wasn't that challenging. So this is just more like a haha funny thing that I noticed that would not have been observable in just how, like, it wouldn't even register if you didn't have the rewind ability to go, okay, I'm gonna rewind and dodge this ability. Oops, I tried to jump over a cross, but he anti-aired me with an axe. So, hey, you know what? That's on me. I guess that's just an anti-cheating measure in the game, right? But most of the bosses in Circle of the Moon have, I don't want to say like an absolutely insane amount of health, because I'm not really sure if it was that they had too much health. It might have been just that they were impossible to hit. It's been a little while since I actually beat this game now, so I can't really describe all these bosses to you in perfect memory, but at least one of them, which was like this giant, like kind of dragon thing, 2 giant dragon bodies with 2 dragon heads, this fight is seared into my gamer memory. In this fight, you are facing off against 2 massive, gross monsters in a dungeon somewhere, as you might expect, and a pretty good chunk of their body is hitbox that can hurt you, and pretty much all that you can hit is their heads. But their heads and their necks will hurt you, obviously, and they breathe fire and shoot stuff at you, and etc., etc. And the way that the stage is laid out is you've got 2 big monsters, and the floor down here, and their feet, which will hurt you, and their heads, which are waving around up here, and then 1 platform in the middle you can stand on, and 1 area down here that you can stand on, and neither of these areas are safe. The dragon heads can just swing and just slap you whenever they want to, and because you're playing on a relatively small GBA screen, their wind-up animation, basically no matter where you're standing, approximately 50% of their wind-up animation happens off-screen, and you have absolutely no time to react to an incoming attack. And if you're standing on the platform and both of them swing for you at the same time, you're basically just gonna eat the hit unless you can drop through the platform to the lower level fast enough. But you drop down to that lower level fast enough, and then you gotta immediately react to jump out of the way, try to get back up before they can shoot fireballs at you or something else. And at some point in here, you gotta hit the thing. I mean, occasionally one of them will settle into a position where it's kind of resting in one spot where you can wail on it with your whip for a second, but it does not last very long. You will usually get punished harshly for swinging even 1 more time than the exact allotted window that the game is kind of giving to you, but the game giving you those hits isn't accurate because, generally speaking, you got a good chance that the other head is going to come and try to slap you during that tiny window, and if you try to dodge that attack at all, you're going to miss the opportunity to hit the other head. And I don't remember exactly how much damage these things are doing per hit, but it's a lot. And I was using a rewind feature to keep myself alive. I never had to retry the fight. I never had to restart it. I never had to load a save and go back and enter again. So There was no transit time. The thing was never getting that much health back, because if I was ever hitting rewind, I was losing maybe 2 or 3 hits on it to avoid getting hit myself. And the fight still probably took me like over 10 minutes. I mean, like I said, I don't know any of the discourse on this game. I haven't watched any playthroughs or speed runs or whatever, so maybe there's an obvious strat that I overlooked and this boss is actually super easy. But it was in keeping with other seemingly poorly designed bosses, and I'm not out here telling you that I'm a perfect, awesome gamer, man, and I ace everything the first time at all. No. I got plenty of gaps in my skill level, but there were enough bosses in this game that felt a little stinky, that felt a little dirty, felt a little foul. It seemed like a trend. I don't think they were all hiding secret easy mode strats that I overlooked. I think that there's a decent chance that most of them were just kind of pants. But perhaps the worst of them all, ooh, the son of a bitch himself, Dracula Tepesh. Now let me tell you something right now, boy. The first fight against Dracula, the classic, feels like Castlevania 1 Dracula fight. He's standing there, lifts up his cloak and shoots stuff and teleports around the room. It's fine. It felt comfortable. You beat that, and then you go through a portal and you fight him in his big monster form. To be expected. You expect these things in a video game. That monster form fight was, now this monster Dracula fight, I mean, initially it seems like not that crazy. He's got a number of different forms he switches into, but generally speaking, you can lay hands on him, you can whack him. Eventually, I mean, it felt like a bug. It felt like an honest-to-God bug. I haven't gone and looked up an actual video of this fight. Eventually, the dude hits a phase where he only goes into 2 forms. One of these forms is invincible. He appears on one side of the map as a really big, kind of like screen-sized enemy, and he will just sweep hard across the entire stage. And your only recourse here is to use your high jump ability to launch yourself up into the air to dodge it. Now, this is not that hard. In fact, the fact that this is so easy to avoid is kind of annoying, because it's just a waste of time, because you get to the point where you can dodge it easily, and you can't do anything to counter it, at least not that I'm aware of, so it's just a waste of time. It's just eating time in the fight. And then the other form that he goes into, where you can actually hit him, is he will turn into a single eyeball, surrounded by a swarm of, I believe, bats. Maybe it was another type of enemy. Again, it's been a little while since I played this fight. Now, this eye is hard enough to hit, because if you are at the edge of the swarm of bats, or whatever is around him, you can just barely reach the eye, and take out a couple of the enemies along the way, right? So you've got to get right in the line of fire of its kind of little guards to be able to do any damage to the actual boss. So if you miscalculate getting in the way of that thing even slightly, it's going to hit you, and you're not going to get any hits off. And it's in this form very, very, very briefly. To my recollection, I mean, the best I was doing on this fight, and I was out of hearts, because I'd used all my heart-restoring items as well, because I barely had any of those. So I was down to just my whip. And to my recollection, I was getting best cycle, like 4 or 5 hits, before it transitioned to another screen wipe, dodge brainlessly out of the way. But the true problem with this form, now let's be very clear, I wouldn't have gotten this far if it weren't for the instant rewind feature. I would have given up several boss fights ago. If I'd been playing this game on GBA, I would have written the game off. I wouldn't have beaten it. If I had somehow gotten to this fight against Dracula, I absolutely would not have beaten the game. Because this bat wing thing with the eyeball in it will only very occasionally swoop down low to kind of ground level range, where you can hit it maybe once, if you're lucky, before that phase ends and it goes back to screen wipe move, right? So you gotta get up in the air to go hit that sucker, right? So you can use your high jump ability, which will take you all the way to the top of this map screen instantaneously. You just whoop, jump into the air, right? Now the problem with this is that you are vulnerable when you do this move. It doesn't do damage while you're doing this. If you hit an enemy while you're going up in the air, the enemy does damage to you. And the screen is very small. and you have only to guess about the position of Dracula above you and his swarm of bats above you. If you want to do any damage during this extremely brief, fleeting window of opportunity to do damage, where you have to sit through another mindlessly jump out of the way of a big attack phase, and you just want this fight to be over, because you're so close to being done with this game, you have no choice but to fling yourself up into the air, using the high jump, to go and try to find and hunt down Dracula Tepesh in his little eyeball form. And at least where I was level-wise, I don't think I was super under-leveled. I mean, I admit I was skipping some enemies when I was backtracking, but I fought everything that I encountered on the way to all of my objectives, and I still fought plenty of stuff during my extracurricular castle exploring, and I found a lot, I don't know about all, but a lot of, like, health-expanding items, okay? This thing, the bats, if I was jumping up into them, they were doing a third of my health. And I had used all of my healing items. And I had a third of my health left. If I did a high jump up to try and find the boss to end it in less than an hour, I had a, I don't know, 1 in 3 chance of just dying, of just hitting the boss and dying. The other one, then another 1 in 3 chance was I'd go somewhere where the boss wasn't, and I'd wasted precious time and couldn't hit him. Then in that last section, maybe I get lucky enough and I can actually take a swing at him. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna say it's more like 3/5 I was likely to kill myself, 1/5 I was likely to be nowhere near him, 1/5 I was likely to actually be within range to hit him on my first jump. So generally speaking, I would jump up, hit him, die, hit instant rewind, go back down, remember approximately where he was, but he's a moving target, so I guess, okay, I think I need to run over a little bit to the right and jump up, hit him again, rewind, a little bit further to the right, jump, okay, that time I was able to hit him once or twice. If I had not had the instant rewind feature, if the game expected me to go and grind to get more health, or like, I don't know, maybe if I like equipped, I mean, I had equipped luck up stuff in the game, because I was going around trying to collect the little cards that give you your magical abilities, which was, to be fair, a fun little mechanic. You collect magic cards that you can kind of combine one from one column with one from another column to give yourself a new type of attack ability. It was an interesting idea. There was a lot of customization to it. There were a lot of different things you can experiment with. It was a neat little system. I didn't really talk about it too much because I didn't think about it too much afterwards. It was fun while it lasted, and it was fun that in the advanced collection they let you know, hey, this type of enemy can drop a card. This type of enemy can't. So you know who to go and grind against once you get your luck up stuff. But I mean, I had luck up stuff equipped and went around and killed a lot of enemies. And I mean, I don't know, maybe there were some that were hoarding all the healing items and I needed to do some Googling or look in the bestiary or whatever. But I mean, I had no healing items. I had not enough magic restoring items to be using the magic stuff during the final boss fight either that much. And I mean, I think I did try a couple of things. I was like, maybe there's an attack that makes this easier. Maybe there's an elemental weakness. And I think I ultimately just wound up using the magic ability that's just raw increase to damage, because it was the only thing I could find that made a difference, because like, I think I was hopeful that like the sword swing would maybe let me take out like the entire swarm of bats, but I think it didn't work that well. I tried some other stuff, it didn't work. I think I'd wound up just using the magic spell that just flat increases your damage output, and it wasn't good enough. If I had been playing that game on GBA back in the day, I'm not sure I would have even gotten to the final boss, but if I had, I would not have beaten this game. I only beat this game thanks to the Advanced Collection and its built-in rewind feature, or I guess hypothetically in another timeline if I played this on an emulator's built-in rewind feature. That fight was blitheringly stupid. Perhaps there's a secret technique or speedrun strat that I overlooked. I don't care. It was hair-pulling and it was not fun. It was not a good note to send that game out on. But moving into Harmony of Dissonance, I was immediately struck by a couple of things that were both significantly better about Harmony of Dissonance and one thing that was worse. You start out in Circle of the Moon with this ominous kind of choir sound and this excellent Repose of Souls theme. Now, I don't want to suggest that I was somehow stunned by the audio quality of Circle of the Moon, because I mean, I've heard plenty of really, standout GBA soundtracks before, but it was impressive nonetheless. It was a good, rich-sounding soundtrack. Those of you who have played Harmony of Dissonance know where I'm going with this, because Harmony of Dissonance opens up and it hits you with that Atari 2600 right away, baby. Yuck. At the end of the day, it's not just the sound quality, because I like me some good old-fashioned bleep bloops, and indeed, there are some good bleep bloops in this game, but a lot of it just does not feel, it's just not good compositions in the first place. I mean, there are a couple of okay ones. The theme that plays in kind of the opening area of the game, and is also, according to this, the theme of the main character. It starts out a little bit rough, but it transitions into a kind of triumphant, heroic sound, and it feels very Castlevania. There's another track early on in the game that I got straight up jump scared by. It was not the quality of this track that I got jump scared by. I mean, though it is kind of catchy, even though it's still a little bit shrill. The main thing that jump scared me about it was that it is the Cosmonaut Tabletop D&D podcast uses it as the theme for their traditional fantasy D&D campaign, and I had no idea what it was from. So imagine my surprise when I've listened to that track like over 50, 60 times across the course of that show. I walk into that area and it just boom, there it is. I was not quite expecting that. But again, I enjoy me some bleep bloops sometimes. There's a lot of really good video game music that remains rock solid even when you listen to it as bleep bloops. In general, the compositions in this game aren't as good as in other Castlevania games. So that was the main thing that hit me right away with Harmony of Dissonance, was the going from the really mysterious dark piano and choir of the title screen and main menu of the previous game into really shrill, not so great, harsh video game music as I booted this one up. But as I mentioned previously, I did like that Harmony of Dissonance very quickly gives us the Dracula's castle that we expect. The Dracula's castle of our minds, if you will. Ooh, I just realized actually I kind of set up a plot element there, didn't I? I was making a joke with that's kind of the story of this game. Oops. And from that perspective, because the game does give us, hey, here's Dracula's castle, here's classic looking Dracula's castle right away, the fact that it then veers pretty quickly into much stranger, more surreal imagery was fun, but not necessarily, I guess I shouldn't say unexpected. It was appreciated, but kind of just breezed past me. As you know, Japanese video game, they're having a little fun this time around. Last time around, it's pretty standard stock Dracula's castle. They give us that flavor right away, and then they're mixing things up. They're adding some extra spice in there. I appreciate it. Little did I know, it was kind of set up for something that I'll get to in a little bit. Kind of one of the neatest things about this game. I'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, right away with this game, maybe because I had been a little bit burned by the final boss and some of the other stuff that was going on in Circle of the Moon, I felt very comfortable with this one right away. I felt like the pacing was a little bit faster. I was clearing rooms really quickly. I could move very fast because you have this really speedy forward and backward dodge assigned to the shoulder buttons. Enemies died pretty fast, even right at the beginning, the enemies that you were confronting immediately. So it felt breezier, it felt faster, and having just beaten another game, briefly beforehand, I think the increase in speed was welcome. The immediate feeling of I am blasting through all these monsters, all these skeletons, and just rushing through and finding stuff quickly was very gratifying. And it was nice to encounter bosses who did not make me want to rend flesh from bone, but my pleasure at discovering the bosses of this game were significantly more manageable did diminish somewhat over time as I began to realize that all of the bosses almost all of them, were very easy and not super memorable. to be fair, I was again still using the instant rewind feature pretty liberally. Listen, some of you guys are going to call me cowards for using that rewind feature a lot, for basically never seeing a game over screen in either of these games. I don't care. I have other stuff to do. I want to beat the game. The tool is there. It is available to me. If I can use it to go, uh-oh, that attack hit me, let me back up, I'll dodge it this time and hit occasionally, I still had fun. I don't think that it ruined the experience for me. I can assure you I would not have been having more fun if I had been spending more time reloading from saves and running back to boss fights, since the bosses were not super duper interesting in the first place. Again, maybe, I don't know the discourse on this game. Maybe there's some people out there who are gonna go, oh man, Jacob, you robbed yourself of the experience by not really learning these characters' intricate attack patterns. But I did not really get that sense. The sense that I got was they read reviews that said the reviews and the bosses in the previous game were absolutely insane, and they slightly overcorrected. While the fact that I remember that weird two-headed dragon thing from Circle of the Moon is not a compliment toward that game, I don't remember any of the bosses from this one. So, and that was the big problem for me with this game, was that as it continued on, it just generally felt shallower than the previous game. One of the things that I noticed immediately was that suspicious areas where it felt like there should have been a secret room did not feature secret rooms, because this game doesn't feature secret rooms, which are kind of a staple of the entire franchise. There weren't sections of the wall you could destroy to discover something tucked away and hidden, which made it really annoying when I was doing some Googling late game and going, where is this one item? And the answer was, oh, the one solitary secret room in the entire game. There's also almost no platforming in this game. I mean, certainly you will have to jump, like, oh, there's a room and there's an upper door and a lower door and you have to do some jumping to get to but there's not platforming challenges. There's not moving platforms. There's not interesting traversal that you have to deal with. There are very few navigational challenges. There's exactly one that you'll find, I don't know, maybe halfway through the game that involves clearing a room before a boulder. And I was pleasantly surprised when I found that. And I kind of hoped that it would indicate more rich challenges such as that were in my near future. That was not the case. And as with the previous game, generally speaking, enemies are not worth your time. You either slap them in one and move on, or if it takes more than one hit, if you're going through that same area again for the 5th time looking for something that you missed or going back through for another reason, you don't want to waste your time fighting with them. You're just going to avoid them and run past them. While I was filming this video, I actually forgot to mention, despite teasing it earlier in the video, I forgot to mention that I found a room in Harmony of Dissonance that spawned in these glass jumping skeleton guys who jump right in your way for an easy one-hit kill, but inexplicably grant around 400 experience points, even as other enemies in their immediate vicinity, which require 1 or 2 hits, grant 1 point of experience. So I was able to just loop this room over and over again for several minutes and level up like 5 or 6 times very, very quickly. Later on, when I came back through, the enemies, these skeleton guys, were only granting me 1 point of experience, so I don't know if that was about hitting a certain level threshold or about a threshold of progression through the game, or maybe if this game has some kind of mechanic built into it where once you kill a certain type of enemy enough times, you lose the experience. It's about fighting unique enemies. Regardless, these things only spawn in one room in the game, so there's no way that when you get to them, they aren't giving you 400 per kill. So I don't know what was going on there. My general strategy, the magic system in this game was not as robust and complicated as the magic system in Circle of the Moon. You don't have all these different cards and stuff. The way that it works now is you collect spell books of different elemental types, and then depending on the classic Castlevania item that you have equipped, when you try to use the item, if your spell book is activated, it will perform a different kind of spell. So basically, each of the different items has a different spell depending on the spell book that you have equipped, the element that you currently have equipped. I pretty quickly found that Wind and Cross was, I don't know, certainly seemed to me like the only thing that mattered. I'm sure there are other ones that are better for raw damage against bosses, but you can just make a bunch of things spin around you that damage anything that you run into. And there are a lot of enemies that are weak enough that they will die to 1 to 3 or 4 of these. So you can just activate this and walk through a room and not interact with the game. And your magic refills quickly enough, and the heart cost is nothing. You can do this pretty much perpetually if you want to. That was another thing, was that I realized after a while that heart upgrades in Harmony of Dissonance were functionally useless because there was no reason to ever just use the items, just use them as, expend hearts to use the items, because you were always going to be doing the magic spells, and the magic spells typically, you were going to run out of MP way before you ran out of hearts. You were going to use 3 or 4 hearts and run out of MP, especially if you were using really strong moves, like I was with the crosses spinning around me. I mean, a couple of times during boss fights, when I drained my MP, deactivated my spell book to use the standard item, just to use the throwing cross. But I had upwards of 200 hearts. It didn't matter. The lack of the interesting enemy card drops meant that trying to fight a bunch of different enemies to collect stuff just wasn't really there. The lack of secret passages meant that scouring, looking at the map and scrutinizing, there ought to be a room here, that engagement wasn't really there. So we're left with, okay, the just traditional engagement of, all right, I'll get my new abilities, and then I'll go and explore the castle for new areas that I can access, right? Wrong! Because you don't get new abilities in this game. Okay, to be completely fair, you do get a couple of movement abilities. You get the slide really early on. I don't think you have it by default. I think you do have to unlock that. And at the very ending of the game, you get super duper high jump, right? You never get a wall jump. The only other ability you get to clear through something is you get the ability to smash thick walls with a strong attack or whatever, which is basically a glorified key. And it's important that I note glorified key, because most of your progress in this game is just gated by keys. There is no interesting problem solving of, ooh, I've come up to an area that I can't get through yet, I wonder what ability I'm gonna have to come back with, or, ooh, I unlocked a new movement ability, I'm gonna use this to reach new secret areas, but also to enter into the next part of the game that I have to get to. This game is entirely built around beating a boss or clearing a section of the story, and you just get a key that unlocks the red doors, or a key that unlocks the green doors. This is not terribly interesting, and also significantly harder to keep a mental map of. Because you're not gonna, you can remember, oh, there was an area where I needed to do a certain kind of jump, or I needed to push a block out of the way, or whatever. It's a lot harder to just remember, what color was that 27th locked door again? And the amount of time that you spend running around the map trying to figure out, okay, did I get the right thing to open that door, or did I open this thing yet, or did the switch that I flipped over here that said you activated something somewhere, was that for this part of the castle maybe, or it was not. It was not fun. It was extremely tedious running around this place. For the front half of the game in particular, they don't give you nearly enough teleporters. There is a reason for that, which I'll get to in just a second, and the reason's kind of cool. I don't know if it was quite cool enough to justify the rest of the game being kind of a pain in the ass. But at this point, to further discuss this game, I will have to talk about kind of a neat surprise. I mean, I really don't consider this a spoiler. If you haven't played this game, you're probably not gonna. I'm certainly not convincing you to go and play Harmony of Dissonance by saying, yeah, it was kind of trash. But it had a neat surprise. It had a neat surprise that is at least gonna make me remember the game if nothing else. It was kind of cool. And I should be very clear. This game was still fun. It was still a mindless kind of video gamey fun to clear rooms and discover new areas and go, ooh, look at this new neat aesthetic. Look at this new goofy monster that I have to fight. There's still a raw satisfaction to, clearing out, the percentage completion of the map and exploring through the whole place. Visually exciting, visually rich, but the actual map design, the way that everything interconnected with each other, or rather the lack of way that everything interconnected with each other, everything felt much more segmented and isolated than it did in Circle of the Moon. It wasn't as satisfying, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily had a bad time. I'm not sure I'm gonna be too keen to replay it again. But with that in mind, the couple of interesting things that this game did that made me go, ooh, ooh, okay, all right, you got a little nugget of creativity going on in here. So I'll start with, there's a little story thing that's pretty early on. It was a pretty early on hook that made me go, ooh, okay, all right, maybe there's a little something more going on with the story, perhaps. There was barely something more going on with the story, but it was a slight something. So basically, you as the player character come to this place with a friend of yours to try and rescue a lady, and your friend seems to be having some memory problems. He thinks he might have been in this castle previously. He's not quite sure. And eventually you come upon Death, the spirit of death. And he's like, hey, listen, Dracula's not around. Something else has summoned my castle. Something else has summoned Dracula's castle into existence. This time, my master is not present, Belmont. You're like, ooh. Intrigue. So as you continue to explore the castle, you run into your friend a couple of times, and he's behaving kind of oddly. He's got partial amnesia, sometimes his memories are coming back, he talks to you a couple times, and then one time he's kind of weirdly aggressive with you. It's a little bit odd. You're not really sure what to make of the guy. He's acting a little bit strange lately around you, but only some of the times. Sometimes he seems normal, sometimes he seems wacky. And eventually, you think you're almost done with the game. Your map is like 80% complete if you're being very thorough like I am. And you're thinking to yourself, I mean, I guess I'm almost done. This game is a little trash, so I'm not complaining that I get to move on to Aria of Sorrow because I hear that one is better. But it still felt short. It still felt kind of short, but whatever, I guess. And you're proceeding up this tower, and you get to a room, and Death is like, haha, mortal, soon your friend will, your friend, he was responsible for summoning the body parts of Dracula again and willing this castle back into existence. And this castle is dual aspected because of the uncertainty within your friend right now, because he is still in his own soul a good guy, but he is being overwhelmed by the spirit of my master, of Dracula, and in the way that he is dual aspected, the castle is dual aspected. And your Belmont character goes, what are you talking about? Juiced Belmont, I guess is his name. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Death? And Death goes, you seriously haven't noticed? Oh boy, you're thicker than I thought. And he takes off, and you follow him through a teleporter, and suddenly your map changes. Your map screen changes, and you don't have 80% complete anymore. You now have like 50% complete, or maybe a little bit less, because the map now shows Castle A and Castle B. And as it turns out, the very small number of teleporters that you had found previously were not just sending you to a different part of the castle. They were sending you to another castle entirely. The castles have the exact same layouts on the map screen, but the contents of all the rooms and the aesthetics in particular are different. And this is where, when I started going to some of those surrealist rooms, one of the surreal rooms you go to, there's like out the window, out the balcony, is like a volcano. Like, where's that happening? Okay, whatever. Magic. Japanese video game. I don't care. Oh, there's a section of the castle that's just a bunch of crystal. Magic. Dracula's castle. Japanese video game. I don't care. The confidence of the developers to just throw absolutely insane stuff at you and know that the players would not blink, would not even question it, would not even question, oh yeah, sometimes there's a volcano outside of Dracula's castle, sometimes there isn't. Video games, am I right, fellow gamers? To know that we wouldn't even question the insanity of that. And the way that the map is designed, you've noticed that because you haven't gotten all of your Metroidvania abilities yet, you haven't gotten the ability to knock down certain walls or open certain doors, you've noticed that certain sections of the castle are totally sequestered off from one another. You cannot walk from one section to the other. You can only teleport between them right now. You may think this is kind of a limiting design choice, because it's making getting around the castle a little bit more tedious. There aren't interesting, shortcuts and stuff being opened up. But you aren't at any point thinking to yourself, oh, there are secretly two versions of the castle, and I am being bamboozled right now. Hats off to you, Harmony of Dissonance. I legitimately thought the game was almost over, but I got. You pulled one over on me. That was a very exciting reveal. Now, even when it happened, I was very worried that it was just basically gonna mean I was gonna have to walk through the exact same castle, laid out essentially the same way, but with slightly different aesthetics and enemies twice in order to beat the game. And that was exactly what it meant, and I knew it was gonna get tedious, but I didn't care because it was just such a fun idea. I was so happy to have been fooled and to discover there was something slightly more interesting going on, it was exciting. I was so happy to get got. I was so happy to spend a little bit more time with the game after that, even though it was still kind of tedious, at minimum, because you started getting more keys at that point. You could bust down some of those walls. A little bit more of the game opened up. It gave you a little bit more access to wander around, and there was some new stuff to find. So it was okay. It wasn't the best thing that it could have been. It was still kind of just, okay, you're walking through two versions of the castle now. It's just more stuff. But like I said, the game had felt kind of short before that, so it's fine. It worked out. I think it was a clever idea. Maybe not the perfect execution, but it was cool nonetheless. It's just too bad that in practice, it continued to be kind of trash. I mean, I think the moment that the straw that really broke the camel's back on that one was, okay, hey, down at the bottom of this one area, there is a wall that I can't get through in one version of the castle. There's just a flat wall, like there's just a one block wall and then more room beyond it that I can't see. So I go down there in the other version of the castle, thinking perhaps there will be a switch in this castle that opens the wall on the other side of the castle, right? And there essentially was. There was now a breakable wall that I could smash, and it's very clear, oh, that's going to affect it in the other castle too. But in Castle B, or whichever one you're in, right, where there is a breakable wall, you break it and you go, cool, all right, I'm going to walk through the other side and see what's there. And in Castle B, there is nothing. They don't even give you a little hold you over small prize. And so you get the big prize. You smash the wall and you walk into an empty ass room. Then you have to turn around and march your ass back to the nearest teleporter, which is quite a few minutes away, watch the lengthy switching between castles animation, and then walk all the way back down there through the now open door to get your prize. Okay, fine, you could have put something there. Okay, whatever. I did eventually locate a teleporter closer to that room than I had initially had access to, but it's still dumb. Like I said, around this time, the game finally starts giving you more teleporters, because the teleporters were not... There were very few teleporters previously because they didn't want you to be... The teleporters are your main way to get back and forth between the two castles. So they just gave you a couple of, like, unique non-castle switching teleporters early on that made the traversal early game really tedious. Later on, they give you a ton of teleporters because you're going to be going back and forth between the different versions of the castle so much. And it's still not enough teleporters. I mean, on one hand, if they had given you a Link to the Past style instant world switch button, I'm not sure that would have worked perfectly either, because some of the room layouts are slightly different, enemy placements are slightly different, and like, you could have cheesed your... That's part of the thing, is like, because the game is sectioned off, right? Of like, okay, there's this one section that you can access in Castle A right now, this other section you can access in Castle B right now, and you need to figure out a way to, like, open a door between Castle B section into Castle B section. You know, right now you can only access in one version of the castle or the other. So if you could just, like, stand in this section of Castle A and instantly switch over to Castle B, that would be like a sequence break. You could bypass your Metroidvania, you know, obstacles. But again, most of the obstacles in this case are just locked doors. So it feels exceptionally arbitrary, because you're not finding a new area, you're finding a palette swap of an area you've already been to, so that it just feels like a waste of your time. And there was just a lot of stuff that was unsatisfying in that way. Like, there's one particular wing, kind of one of the lower basement levels. There's two lower basements kind of next to each other. And one of them, I finally get to the ending of it, and what is my reward, right? I find a key that unlocks something I haven't discovered yet, and I find, oh, to proceed further and link these two parts of the castle together, you need the high jump ability that you don't have yet. Shucks. Then what was really bizarre was I went to the other end of the basement, and there was a hint card, because this game has a few, like, little cards that give you hints about things. It's very weird and selective about when it gives them to you. There was a hint card that says, hey, the waterway key can be used to control the waterway. And then 2 rooms away is, like, you're already, when you pick up that card, you are on the path that dead ends at the waterway controls with a big keyhole in it. So you either don't have the key and can't interact with that system yet, but you're gonna know that it's important because it's the dead end and there's nothing to pick up, so it has to be something, and there's a nearby area that's flooded that you can't go into, and there's a water fountain near it. Or you're gonna have found the sluice gate key, and you're gonna know what it is. It was just very odd how the game was like, sometimes didn't want to tell you anything and could let you wander around for like an hour, and then other times was like very selectively hand-holdy, and just absolutely refused to allow any sequence breaks of any kind. And there were no interesting shortcuts in this game. There was no interesting stuff to discover of linking different parts of the castle together. I mean, so like for example, by the time that you get the high jump, right? Most of the shortcuts in the game are connected by high jumps. There's just a big, tall wall, and you need to be able to high jump to the top of it and then drop down, and these are the ways you connect different wings of the castle. By the time that you get these high jump shortcuts, they are absolutely utterly meaningless, because there is nothing that you can get to faster by high jumping than you can by using the teleporters. There are a couple of areas that you can't get into without the high jump. For example, one of the basements in the Castle B version, you have to use the high jump to get into the entryway of the B version of the castle, right? Which is where the game starts in A, but you haven't been able to get there otherwise. So there's certainly some areas where you need the high jump for progression, but like getting 100% map completion, or technically you can't get true 100% map completion in this game, I don't think, because of the way that the final boss fight works. But getting near 100% map completion is really pointless, because you're just gonna run over to this shortcut, jump up to the top of it to fill it in on your map, jump back down, run to a nearby teleporter, switch to the other version of the castle, run back over, high jump to the top of the shortcut, jump back down, and then go back to the teleporter, because there's nothing to be acquired at them, and the shortcuts are pointless because the game is over. You've already thoroughly explored both of the two areas that are connected by the shortcut, and you can get to either area faster by the teleporter. The map design in Harmony of Dissonance is just not good. The visuals were pretty good, though. And so with that, my first two Castlevania adventures are complete. I do intend to come back and talk about Aria of Sorrow, and I guess I'll also go ahead and play that there SNES Rondo of Blood. I hear the CD-ROM version is significantly better, but I did actually get that as well, because I also managed to get the collection of I think it's the CD-ROM version of Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. I actually got that on PS4 on sale for like $3 or something a couple weeks ago, so who knows? Maybe I'll be back to do more Castlevania talk, and I will definitely be back to talk about this, Aria of Sorrow. I'm very keen to play Aria of Sorrow. I'll check out Rondo of Blood too. If you guys like this, and like that next one as well, perhaps I will proceed to check out the classic games, because I also got that collection for like $3, and maybe Symphony of the Night and CD-ROM Rondo of Blood. But that's in the far-flung distant future, man. Much like Aria of Sorrow is in the far-flung distant future, because it's set in the future. I know that about it, at least. Don't know for sure if I'll cover those as well, but I will definitely at least be back to talk about Aria of Sorrow. So you can look forward to that, or you can not if you didn't watch this video, and you don't care about Castlevania. Or maybe you did watch the whole thing all the way through, just hoping that it would entertain you, and you're here at the end and it didn't. And you're just really disappointed, and you're like, I'm not coming back for that Aria of Sorrow video, in which case, never fear, because I'm going to talk about other non-Castlevania stuff in the near future as well, so look forward to that. And like I said, I mostly only play this thing when I'm on the road, so maybe a while before that Aria of Sorrow video. Hopefully not next Halloween, but hey, you guys know how it is with me sometimes. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.